Captain Lee Dongwu stood at the observation deck of the Galactic Council chambers and watched his species get thrown out of civilization. The massive crystal hall below him held representatives from 847 different alien species, and most of them wanted humanity gone forever. The voting had been going on for 3 hours now, and the numbers kept climbing against Earth. 723 species voted yes to kick humans out of the galaxy. Only 89 voted no, and 35 did not vote at all. Lee Dongwu felt sick watching the display screen show those red numbers getting bigger and bigger. Next to him, Dr. Park Hana held a thick folder of papers that proved humans could live peacefully with aliens. She had spent 15 years studying different alien cultures and writing reports about how well humans got along with other species. None of it mattered now. Her hands shook as she watched species after species vote to banish humanity. Ambassador Kim Jae-hwa sat in the human section, below wearing his best diplomatic uniform. He had not moved for the past hour, just sitting straight and proud even though his people were losing everything. Lee Dongwu admired the old man's strength. Most other humans in the chamber were crying or shouting, but Kim Jae-hwa stayed calm, like a statue. The charges against humanity were read out loud by a tall blue alien with 6 arms. Humans were accused of expanding too fast across the galaxy, building too many weapons, and interfering with primitive alien species. The worst charge was about something called the Soul Incident, where human military forces had attacked alien slave traders in the Kepler 442 system and refused to give up the soldiers who did it. Lee Dongwu remembered that incident well, because he had been there. The slave traders were selling children from a species that could not fight back, and the local Galactic Council forces did nothing to stop it. Human ships arrived and destroyed the slave camps, freeing thousands of innocent beings. The Council called it an illegal attack, but Lee Dongwu still believed it was the right thing to do. High Arbiter Kultes floated above the chamber in a sphere of golden light. The ancient creature looked like smoke given form, with eyes that glowed like small stars. Kultes had ruled the Galactic Council for over 1,000 years, and nobody had ever seen the creature show emotion. Today was no different. The vote is complete, Kultes announced in a voice that echoed through every mind in the chamber. By the authority granted to this council by the ancient laws of galactic civilization, the species known as human is hereby banished from all council space. You have 180 standard rotations to remove all your people, ships, and buildings. Any human found in council space after this time will be considered an enemy of all civilized species. The words hit Lee Dongwu like a punch to the stomach. 180 days to pack up everything humanity had built across hundreds of worlds and leave forever. It seemed impossible. Counselor Vexthan of the Altarian species stood up to speak. The tall gray alien had led the movement to banish humanity from the beginning. This decision was not made lightly, Vexthan said with his mechanical voice translator. Humans are too dangerous, too unpredictable, and too willing to use violence. They do not understand the careful balance that keeps our galaxy peaceful. Perhaps in isolation they will learn to be more civilized. Dr. Park Hana made a small, angry sound. Civilized, she whispered to Lee Dongwu. They call slavery civilized as long as nobody fights it. Down in the chamber, Ambassador Kim Jae-hwa finally stood up. The entire hall went quiet as the old human diplomat walked to the speaking platform. He did not look angry or sad, just tired. Honored Counselor Kultes and respected representatives, Kim Jae-hwa began. Humanity accepts this judgment. We will leave your space within the time given. But I want you to remember this day because someday you may need the very qualities you are casting out. The galaxy is vast and full of dangers you have not yet faced. When that day comes, remember that you chose fear over friendship. He bowed deeply to the chamber and walked back to his seat. Many of the alien representatives looked uncomfortable at his words, but none of them changed their votes. As the session ended and aliens began filing out of the chamber, Lee Dongwu made his way down to the human section. Ambassador Kim stood, with the small group of human diplomats and staff giving quiet orders about evacuation procedures. Sir, Lee Dongwu said as he approached, what are our orders? Kim looked at him with eyes that had seen too much disappointment. We go home, Captain, and then we prepare. Prepare for what, sir? For whatever comes next. The Council thinks we are too dangerous as we are. Perhaps it is time to show them what dangerous really looks like. Dr. Park Hana joined them, still, holding her useless research files. They did not even read my cultural integration reports. 20 years of work proving that humans and aliens can live together in peace, and they did not care. They care, Kim said quietly. That is why they are afraid. They have built a civilization based on staying the same, never changing, never growing. We represent everything they fear about the future. A young aide rushed up to them with a communication device. Sir, we are receiving messages from human colonies across the galaxy. They want to know what to do. Kim took the device and activated the broad-spectrum transmitter. This is Ambassador Kim Jae-wha, speaking to all human settlements. The Galactic Council has voted to banish our species from civilized space. We have 180 days to evacuate. Begin immediate preparations for departure. More detailed instructions will follow. Stay strong, and remember that this is not the end of our story. As they prepared to leave the council chambers for the last time, Lee Dongwoo looked back at the massive crystal hall. For 30 years, humans had participated in galactic civilization, trying to fit in and follow the rules. They had contributed to science, art, and culture. They had helped solve conflicts and protected the weak. And now it was all over because they were too different, too willing to fight for what was right. Outside the chambers, groups of alien representatives walked by without looking at the humans. Some seemed ashamed, others appeared relieved. A few, species that had voted against the banishment, approached quietly to express their regret, but most stayed away. The journey back to the human embassy was silent. The building that had served as Earth's voice in galactic politics would be empty within days. 30 years of diplomatic history packed up and shipped away like it never mattered. That night, Lee Dongwoo stood on the embassy balcony looking up at the strange alien stars of Nexus Prime. Somewhere out there beyond the edge of Council space was humanity's future. The Council expected them to disappear quietly into the void, to become another forgotten species that could not adapt to civilized life. But humans had never been good at meeting other people's expectations. They had survived ice ages and world wars, crossed oceans, and reached for the stars. Being kicked out of the galaxy would not break them. It would just make them stronger. Ambassador Kim joined him on the balcony, holding 2 cups of coffee. Regrets, Captain? About leaving? No, sir. About not fighting back? Maybe. Who says we are not fighting back? Sometimes the best response to being underestimated is to exceed all expectations. Kim smiled for the first time since the vote. The Council thinks they know what humans are capable of. They are about to learn how wrong they can be. Admiral Choi Min-ho had organized many military operations in his career, but nothing like this. Moving every human being out of Galactic Council space in 180 days should have been impossible. The logistics alone were enough to break most minds. 847 human colonies, 23 research stations, 156 trading posts, and millions of people scattered across thousands of light years. But Choi Min-ho was not most people, and humans were not most species. Standing in the command center of the massive space station orbiting Titan, he watched hundreds of screens showing evacuation progress from across the galaxy. Each screen represented thousands of human lives being uprooted from homes they had built over decades. Yet instead of chaos and panic, he saw order and determination. Status report, he called to his staff. Colonel Yoon Tae-ho stepped forward with a data pad. Sir, we are ahead of schedule on 70% of evacuations. The outer rim colonies are moving faster than expected. Industrial facilities are being stripped down and packed for transport. We should have everything out within the deadline. That was the part the Galactic Council expected. What they did not expect was what humans were doing with all that evacuated equipment and knowledge. In the restricted levels of the Titan station, engineer Kang Subin, worked 18 hours a day on projects that had been theoretical dreams just months ago. Free from council regulations and oversight committees, human scientists were pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. "Admiral," Subin called as Choi Minho entered the engineering lab. "You need to see this." The lab looked like organized chaos. Machines that should not exist hummed with energy, while holographic displays showed mathematical equations that would make most species dizzy. At the center of it all, Dr. Shin Nari stood connected to a device that seemed to be part computer and part living organism. "What am I looking at?" Choi Minho asked. "The future," Shin Nari said without opening her eyes. Her voice sounded strange, like an echo of itself. "I am interfaced directly with a quantum probability field. Human neural patterns can do something no other known species can achieve. We can navigate quantum space through intuition rather than calculation." She disconnected from the machine and stumbled slightly. Subin caught her arm to steady her. "The implications are staggering, Admiral. We can communicate instantly across any distance. We can jump to FTL without using the Council beacon networks. We can essentially step outside normal space-time." "Choi." Minho tried to process this information. "How is this possible?" "Human brains evolved differently," Shin Nari explained. "Most species developed logical, linear thinking patterns. Humans developed intuitive leaps, pattern recognition, and the ability to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously. Quantum mechanics responds to consciousness, and human consciousness is apparently very quantum-friendly. The demonstration that followed changed everything Choi Minho thought he knew about physics. Shin Nari connected to another device, and suddenly her voice was speaking from a communication array 3 star systems away. No delay, no signal degradation, just instant communication across impossible distances. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Captain Lee Dongwoo, now promoted to Commodore, was leading the evacuation of the Kepler 4e42 system when his team made the discovery that would change human history. The ancient ruins on the 4th planet, the same ruins that had caused the sole incident when humans defended the local population from slave traders, held secrets nobody had imagined. "Admiral, you need to get out here immediately," Lee Dongwoo transmitted through the new quantum communication system. "We found something that predates the Galactic Council by millions of years." The journey to Kepler 442 took 2 days using conventional FTL drives. When Choi Minho arrived, he found human archaeologists and scientists swarming over structures that defied explanation. The buildings were made of a material that seemed to shift between solid matter and energy, and they contained technology that made the most advanced council systems look primitive. "We are calling them the predecessors," Dr. Park Hana explained, as she guided the Admiral through the ruins. "They were here long before any current galactic species evolved, and Admiral, they faced exactly the same situation we did." The evidence was overwhelming. Data cores that still functioned after millions of years told the story of a species that had been cast out by an early version of the Galactic Council for being too innovative, too willing to challenge established order. The predecessors had responded by transcending the limitations that their critics claimed were necessary for civilization. "They did not just survive their exile," Park Hana continued. "They evolved beyond anything their former peers could imagine, and they left all this behind as a gift for whoever came after them." The technology was incredible. Ships that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Weapons that could disable entire fleets without killing anyone. Construction techniques that could build habitats inside stars or in the void between galaxies. Most importantly, they left behind a complete philosophical framework for a civilization based on growth and adaptation, rather than stagnation and control. As the human evacuation continued, other developments were changing the situation. Across the galaxy, not every species had supported the banishment, and some were quietly helping humanity despite the Council's decree. The Canary, an insectoid species known for their analytical abilities, provided detailed intelligence about Council military movements and political developments. Their hive mind structure made them naturally sympathetic to humanity's collective approach to problem solving. The delphinids, aquatic beings from the Vega system, offered hidden supply caches and safe harbor for human refugees who could not reach the evacuation ships in time. They had been among the few species to vote against the banishment and were now facing political pressure for their support of humanity. Even some Altarians, despite their species officially supporting the exile, quietly provided assistance. A growing faction within Altarian society disagreed with Councillor Vexithan's hardline position and believed the council was making a terrible mistake. As the evacuation entered its final phase, these underground networks of support revealed something important. The Galactic Council was not as unified as it appeared. The vote to banish humanity had exposed deep divisions within galactic civilization, and many species were beginning to question whether their leadership was making the right decisions. Colonel Yun Taiho coordinated with these resistance networks while officially denying any contact with them. The information they provided was invaluable for planning humanity's future. They learned which species were building up their military forces, which governments were facing internal conflicts, and which regions of space might be vulnerable to external threats. Most importantly, they learned that the Council's rigid structure was creating exactly the kind of stagnation and weakness that the predecessors had warned about millions of years ago. On the final day of the evacuation, Commodore Li Dongwu commanded the last convoy of human ships leaving Council space. As his vessel crossed the designated boundary, he activated the quantum communication system to send a message directly to every Council world simultaneously. "This is Commodore Li Dongwu of the Human Evacuation Fleet," he transmitted. "All human personnel and assets have been removed from Council space as ordered. We leave behind no military threats, no territorial claims, and no hostile intentions. But we also leave behind no friendship, no cooperation, and no assistance should you ever need it. You wanted us gone because you feared what we might become. Today you will find out if your fear was justified. This is not goodbye, Council. This is graduation." The transmission cut off, and the last human ships disappeared into the void beyond Council space. What the Council did not know was that humanity was not retreating into exile. They were advancing into freedom, free from regulations that limited their science, politics that constrained their choices, and fear that restricted their potential. In the months that followed, long-range sensors detected massive construction, projects in the direction of human space, energy signatures that did not match any known technology. The construction of structures so large they could be seen from light years away. But there was something else the sensors detected that made even the most confident council leaders nervous. Complete silence from human space. No communications, no diplomatic signals, no requests for assistance or trade negotiations. Humanity had vanished into the darkness beyond civilized space, and they were building something that the galaxy had never seen before. 2 years passed without a single word from human space, and the silence was making the Galactic Council very nervous. At first, council members had celebrated. Trade routes that humans had disrupted with their aggressive expansion returned to normal patterns. Territorial disputes that had involved human colonies were resolved peacefully. The galaxy seemed more stable without the unpredictable human element causing problems. High Arbiter Koltes had even made a rare public statement declaring the banishment a success, proof that the Council's wisdom in maintaining order had prevailed over chaos and violence. But then the reports started coming in from the Rim territories. Captain Nexavara of the Centauri Deep Space Patrol was the first to detect the anomalies. His long-range sensors picked up massive energy signatures from the direction of human space, readings that made no sense according to known physics. The power outputs were comparable to entire star systems, but they were organized in patterns that suggested artificial construction. "Command, this is Deep Scout 7. Nexavara transmitted back to Council headquarters. "I am detecting construction activity in the Perseus arm that defies explanation. Energy signatures suggest structures larger than anything in Council space, using technology that does not match any known specifications." The response from headquarters was predictable. "File a report, maintain safe distance, do not attempt contact or investigation." The Council's standard procedure for dealing with anything they did not understand was to ignore it and hope it went away. but the anomalies were getting bigger. Prime Minister Lee Ji-hye stood at the observation deck of New Seoul, humanity's capital, world in the Perseus Arm, and looked out at something that would have been impossible 3 years ago. The planet itself had been transformed into a living organism, its surface covered with bioarchitectural structures that grew and adapted to the needs of their inhabitants. The cities were not built. They were grown from engineered coral that could think, adapt, and repair itself. Buildings that could expand when more space was needed, shrink when efficiency was required, and reconfigure themselves based on changing purposes. Transportation was handled by organisms that moved through tunnels, that grew through the planet's crust like arteries. Fellow humans, Lee Ji-hye addressed the hidden human parliament. 3 years ago, the Galactic Council cast us out for being too dangerous, too unpredictable. They wanted us to disappear quietly into the void and never trouble them again. Instead, we have become something they never imagined possible. The transformation was staggering. Free from council oversight and regulations, humanity had not just survived exile, they had transcended it. Using technology recovered from the predecessor ruins and combining it with their own innovations, they had created a civilization that operated on principles the council could not even understand. General Park Seo-jun commanded a defense force that did not just use ships, they used living vessels. Grown from bioengineered coral that incorporated quantum mechanical properties, these ships could self-repair, evolve in response to threats, and exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. A single human vessel could appear in dozens of locations at once, making traditional military tactics useless against them. The breakthrough had come when scientist Oh Minky successfully interfaced human neural patterns with predecessor data cores. The ancient aliens had left behind not just technology, but a complete philosophy of existence based on growth, adaptation, and transcendence of artificial limitations. The predecessors faced the same choice we did, Oh Minky explained to the Parliament. Conform to the rigid structures of their galactic civilization, or transcend those structures entirely. They chose transcendence, and they left us the tools to do the same. The most revolutionary development was the integration of human consciousness with quantum probability fields. Humans could now think collectively when needed while maintaining individual identity. They could process information at speeds that made conventional computers look like stone tools. Most importantly, they could exist partially outside normal space-time, making them effectively invisible to any species still bound by traditional physics. Captain Bae Hyojin led the Ghost Squadron, ships that phased between dimensions and could observe council space without being detected. Her reports painted a picture of a galactic civilization in slow decline. The unity that held the council together was largely based on having humanity as a common threat, she reported. Without us to fear, old rivalries are resurfacing. The Altarians are building military fleets in secret. The Zerion Imperium on the galactic edge is making aggressive moves toward council territory. Several species are withdrawing from cooperative agreements. But the most disturbing intelligence came from deep within council space itself. Political factions that had supported the human banishment were now using the same arguments against other species they considered too dangerous or unpredictable. The fear-based decision-making that had led to humanity's exile was spreading like a disease through galactic civilization. Meanwhile, humanity continued to grow and adapt at an exponential rate. New human colonies were not built on planets, they were grown in space itself, vast living structures that could exist in the vacuum between stars, drawing energy directly from quantum fluctuations and housing millions of people in conditions that were more comfortable than anything on traditional worlds. The population was growing too, but not through conventional reproduction. Humans had learned to create new consciousness patterns that could inhabit biomechanical bodies, effectively achieving a form of immortality that did not depend on preserving original biological forms. Death became a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent ending. Dr. Cha Eun-ji, humanity's leading expert on alien psychology, studied the reports from Ghost Squadron with growing concern. The Council is following exactly the same pattern that destroyed the predecessor's original civilization. Rigid hierarchy, fear of change, and the gradual elimination of any species that challenges their narrow definition of acceptable behavior. The pattern was clear in the historical records, left behind in the predecessor ruins. A galactic civilization that had started with noble intentions had gradually become more and more restrictive, casting out species that showed too much innovation or independence. Eventually, they had eliminated all diversity and creativity from their society, leaving behind a stagnant empire that collapsed from internal weaknesses. History is repeating itself, Chaunji concluded. The Council thinks they solved their human problem, but they have actually accelerated their own decline. Without us to push them toward growth and adaptation, they are reverting to the same mistakes that have destroyed galactic civilizations before. The irony was not lost on humanity. They had been banished for being too dangerous to galactic stability, but their absence was making the galaxy less stable, not more. As the second year of exile ended, long-range Council sensors detected something that made even the most confident leaders pause. A human ship had appeared at the edge of Council space, but it was unlike anything in their databases. The vessel seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Its energy signature suggested it was partially composed of living matter, and it appeared to be scanning Council territory with sensors that operated on unknown principles. The ship transmitted a single message before disappearing. The children have grown up. Captain Nexvara, whose patrol had detected the first signs of humanity's transformation, found his ship visited by beings that looked human but had been changed in fundamental ways. They appeared in his quarters without triggering any security systems, spoke directly into his mind without using communication devices, and left behind information that challenged everything he thought he knew about the nature of reality. "Your civilization is dying," one of the beings told him. "The same fear that drove you to cast us out is now consuming you from within. When the collapse comes, remember that you chose this path. We offered cooperation, you demanded conformity. We offered growth, you chose stagnation. We offered partnership, you selected isolation." The being handed Nexvara a small device that contained detailed information about threats gathering at the edge of galactic space, problems that the Council's rigid hierarchy was preventing them from addressing effectively. "When you are ready to try a different approach," the being said before vanishing, "we will be waiting." Nexvara stared at the device for a long time before activating it. The information it contained was terrifying. Aggressive species were massing beyond Council territory, drawn by intelligence that suggested the galactic civilization was weak and divided. Military buildups that the Council leadership was ignoring, because acknowledging them would require admitting their policies had failed. Most disturbing of all was evidence that some high-ranking Council members were deliberately weakening galactic defenses, hoping to eliminate political rivals and consolidate power during the crisis they knew was coming. The galaxy was heading toward a war that could destroy everything the Council claimed to protect, and the only species that might be able to prevent. It had been cast out for being too dangerous to keep around. Nexvara made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 years earlier. The Xerian Imperium struck without warning on a Tuesday morning, and within 6 hours 17 Council worlds were burning. Their ships appeared simultaneously across multiple star systems, using technology that made the Council's best defensive systems look like toys. The Xerion vessels were massive, dark constructs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and their weapons turned entire planets into glowing slag within minutes. High Arbiter Kultes received the first reports. In the emergency session chamber, surrounded by panicking representatives from hundreds of species, the ancient being's glowing eyes dimmed as each new report arrived, bringing worse news than the last. "The Outer Rim defenses have been completely overwhelmed," reported General Kolanath of the Council Defense Force. "Our ships cannot even get close enough to engage effectively. Xerian technology is decades ahead of anything in our arsenal." The Altarian homeworld of Nexus Prime itself came under attack on the third day. Councillor Vexthan, who had led the movement to banish humanity, watched from his tower as alien ships tore through the planetary defense grid like it was made of paper. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his military advisors. "Our intelligence indicated the Xerion were a minor power on the galactic rim. The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. The Zerion Imperium had been building their forces for decades, using intelligence provided by traitors within the Council itself. They knew exactly where every defensive installation was located, which species had military capabilities worth worrying about, and most importantly, they knew that the Council's unity had been shattered by internal conflicts. As Council forces fell back toward the inner systems, a message arrived that changed everything. Fleet Admiral Huang Doyun sat in the command center of New Seoul, watching the reports of galactic warfare with the detached interest of someone observing events in a distant land. Around him, human military leaders tracked the movement of Zerion forces with technology that made their intelligence-gathering capabilities far superior to anything the Council possessed. "Sir," reported Commander Lim Woo-jin of the flagship Indomitable, "we are receiving a priority transmission from Council space. They are requesting immediate assistance." The message came through on emergency frequencies that had not been used since the banishment. High Arbiter Kultes appeared on the communication screen, looking more desperate than the ancient being had ever appeared in public. "To the human leadership," Kultes began. "The Galactic Council formally requests your assistance in defending civilized space against the Zerion invasion. We acknowledge that our previous decisions may have been hasty. The galaxy needs your unique capabilities." Huang Doyun looked around the command center at his staff. These were humans who had been born in exile, who had grown up knowing that their species had been cast out for being too dangerous to tolerate. Now the same council that had banished them was begging for help. "Transmit our response," Huang Doyun ordered. "We will consider it." The reply sent shockwaves through council space. After 3 years of silence, humanity's first communication was 2 words that carried the weight of everything that had happened since the banishment. Dr. Cha Yunji led the first human diplomatic mission back to Council space since the exile. Her ship, the Transcendent, materialized inside the supposedly impregnable Nexus Prime defense grid without triggering a single alarm. The technology demonstration was subtle but unmistakable. Humanity could go anywhere they wanted, whenever they wanted, and there was nothing the Council could do to stop them. The reunion in the Council chambers was tense and strange. The humans who returned were recognizably the same species that had left 3 years earlier, but they had been changed in fundamental ways. They were taller, their movements more graceful. Their eyes held depths that seemed to reflect infinity itself. Dr. Cha Yunji stood at the same speaking platform where Ambassador Kim Jae-wha had delivered humanity's farewell address. The chamber was packed with representatives who remembered the banishment vote and were now seeing its consequences. "Honored Councillor Kultes," Yunji began, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond normal hearing. "Humanity appreciates your request for assistance. However, we have some concerns about the current structure of galactic civilization that need to be addressed." She gestured, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber showing detailed intelligence about the Zerion invasion. Information that the Council's best intelligence services had been unable to gather was laid out with casual ease. "The Zerion Imperium is not acting alone," Yunji continued. "They have been receiving support from sources within the Council itself, species and individuals who believe that the current system needs to be swept away and replaced with something more efficient." The accusations sent waves of shock through the chamber. Several representatives stood to protest, but Yunji continued speaking. "We have evidence of deliberate intelligence leaks, sabotage of defensive systems, and coordination with Zerion forces. The invasion was planned not just to conquer Council territory, but to eliminate political opposition and consolidate power under a new order." Commander Lim Woo-jin's ship demonstrated humanity's evolved capabilities by interfacing directly with the Council's central computer systems. Within seconds, classified files were displayed showing the conspiracy in complete detail. Communications between Zerion leaders and high-ranking Council officials, financial records proving the payment of bribes, and military plans that could only have been created with inside knowledge. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The Zerion invasion was not an external conquest. It was a coup disguised as a war. "Councillor Vexthon," Yunji said, turning toward the Altarian leader. You have been in communication with Zarion leadership for over 2 years. Would you like to explain to this chamber why you have been providing them with classified military intelligence? Vexthon's denial died in his throat as holographic recordings played his own voice discussing Council defensive weaknesses with Zarion military commanders. The chamber erupted in chaos as representatives realized that the being who had led the Yar movement to banish humanity had been working with their enemies all along. The military situation changed dramatically once humanity entered the conflict. The first joint human council operation was the defense of the Antares system, a critical trade hub that the Zarion expected to capture within days. Human ghost ships phased behind Zarion lines, while council vessels provided frontal assault. The coordination was flawless, with human commanders interfacing directly with alien crew members through quantum neural links that allowed instant communication and perfect tactical coordination. The battle lasted 6 hours instead of the 6 days the Zarion had planned. When it ended, the supposedly invincible Zarion fleet was in full retreat, and Council forces had captured several enemy commanders alive. But the real victory was not military, it was political. The joint operation proved that humans and aliens could work together more effectively than anyone had imagined. The quantum neural linking technology allowed different species to share thoughts and experiences directly, creating understanding that went far beyond mere cooperation. Captain Nexavara, the Centauri officer who had been the first to detect humanity's transformation, served as liaison between human and council forces during the Antares battle. The experience of sharing consciousness with human crew members changed his understanding of what galactic civilization could become. They do not just fight alongside us, he reported to Council headquarters. They fight as us. The neural links create a unity of purpose that makes individual species limitations irrelevant. A Centauri navigator's spatial awareness combined with human intuitive leaping creates navigation capabilities neither species could achieve alone. The implications were staggering. If different species could share consciousness and capabilities directly, the rigid hierarchies and competition that had defined galactic civilization for millennia could be replaced by genuine cooperation and mutual enhancement. As the war against the Zarion continued, captured enemy officers revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. The invasion had been planned as the first phase of a complete restructuring of galactic civilization. The old council would be eliminated, replaced by a military dictatorship that would rule through force rather than cooperation. But the conspirators had made a critical error. They had planned their coup based on intelligence that was 3 years out of date. They expected to face the same human species that had been banished, not the transcended civilization that had emerged from exile. The Zarion Imperium found themselves fighting not just the council forces they had planned to defeat, but an entirely new form of warfare that their strategies could not counter. Human ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, crews that could share consciousness across species barriers, and technology that operated on principles their best scientists could not understand. Most importantly, they faced a human species that had learned the lessons of exile and transcended the limitations that had once made them vulnerable to political manipulation. The galaxy was about to discover that casting out humanity had not eliminated the danger they represented. The Zarion War ended not with the destruction of an enemy, but with the transformation of a galaxy. Chancellor Kim Suho stood before the Reformed Galactic Assembly in the Great Hall of New Nexus, a living structure that had grown from the ruins of the old council chambers. The building itself embodied the new philosophy of galactic civilization, its walls shifting and adapting to the needs of the diverse species within it. We learned that fear makes us weak, Kim Suho addressed the representatives. For too long, this galaxy has been governed by the principle that differences are dangerous, that change threatens stability, and that unity requires conformity. Today, we choose a different path. We choose curiosity over caution, growth over stagnation, and cooperation over control. The audience represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans sat alongside Altarians who had once demanded their exile. Former Zarion officers worked with council species they had tried to conquer. The neural linking technology that had proven so effective in warfare had been adapted for peaceful cooperation. allowing direct understanding between species that had been enemies for generations. The transformation had begun during the final phases of the war. As human and council forces pushed deeper into Xerion territory, they discovered that the invasion had not been motivated by conquest or aggression. The Xerion homeworld was dying, their star entering a phase that would make their system uninhabitable within decades. Admiral Song Yejin, who commanded the joint fleet that reached the Xerion capital, found herself negotiating with desperate refugees rather than conquering an aggressive empire. The rigid bureaucracy of the old council had repeatedly denied Xerion requests for assistance with evacuation and resettlement. The military coup had been their last desperate attempt to secure a future for their species. They were not conquerors. Song Yejin reported to the emergency assembly. They were a dying people whose requests for help had been ignored for so long that violence seemed like their only option. The old system failed them just as completely as it failed us. The solution that emerged challenged every assumption about how galactic civilization should work. Instead of punishing the Xerion for their invasion, the reformed government offered them something the old council never could: genuine integration and mutual support. Professor Nam Jinwoo led the effort to establish integrated colonies where multiple species did not just coexist but created hybrid cultures. Using technology adapted from predecessor ruins and enhanced by human innovations, these settlements became laboratories for new forms of civilization. On New Harmony, former Xerion military commanders worked alongside human engineers and Altarian philosophers to design cities that could adapt to the needs of any species. Buildings that could adjust their atmosphere, gravity, and even the passage of time to accommodate different biological requirements. Transportation systems that connected not just different locations, but different ways of experiencing reality itself. The breakthrough came when they realized that consciousness itself was the key to true cooperation. The neural linking technology that humans had developed allowed different species to literally experience life from other perspectives. An aquatic delphinid could understand what it meant to see colors beyond their natural spectrum by linking with a human artist. A logical Altarian could experience the intuitive leaps that made human problem-solving so effective. But the most profound change was philosophical. The old Galactic Council had been based on the principle that civilization required limits, that freedom was dangerous, and that progress must be carefully controlled to prevent chaos. The reformed government operated on humanity's hard-learned principle that the universe was vast enough for all possibilities to coexist. The former Xerion commander, Arbiter RulesHFY, led the War Crimes Tribunal that exposed the full extent of the conspiracy behind the invasion. The evidence revealed corruption that went far deeper than anyone had suspected. High-ranking council officials had not just provided intelligence to the Xerion, they had actively weakened galactic defenses and eliminated species they considered politically inconvenient. The system was designed to fail, RulesHFY concluded in his final report. The rigid hierarchy made adaptation impossible, the fear-based decision-making prevented effective responses to threats, and the elimination of dissenting voices removed the very diversity that could have provided solutions. The old council did not fall to external conquest, it collapsed from internal stagnation. Councillor Vexthon, the Altarian leader who had orchestrated humanity's banishment, faced trial not just for treason, but for crimes against the future of galactic civilization. His defense was that he had acted to preserve stability and order. "You preserved nothing," Kim Suho testified at the trial. "You cast out the very qualities that could have saved you. Innovation, adaptation, the willingness to challenge established thinking. You feared that humans were too dangerous to your vision of order. You were right to fear us, but not for the reasons you thought." The sentence was not execution or imprisonment, but something the old council would never have considered: integration and rehabilitation. Vexthon was required to undergo neural linking with humans and other species he had opposed, experiencing firsthand the perspectives he had tried to eliminate. The process was designed not to punish but to expand understanding. The change in Vexthon was remarkable. The being who had once argued that humans were too unpredictable to coexist with other species became one of the strongest advocates for the neural linking programs that were transforming galactic society. 5 years after the end of the war, the galaxy had become something unrecognizable to those who remembered the old order. Trade was conducted not through rigid commercial treaties, but through networks of mutual benefit that adapted to changing needs. Scientific research proceeded not through careful committee oversight, but through collaborative projects that combined the unique capabilities of different species. Most remarkably, the population of the galaxy was growing not just through reproduction, but through the creation of new forms of consciousness. The integration of biological and quantum mechanical systems allowed for types of awareness that had never existed before. Beings that could exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, consciousness patterns that could survive the death of their original bodies, and hybrid entities that combined the best qualities of different species. Captain Lee Dongwu, now an elder statesman in the reformed government, spoke at the dedication ceremony for New Nexus. The living station had grown to house millions of beings and continued expanding as needed, its structure adapting to accommodate new species and new forms of life as they were discovered or created. "They banished us for being dangerous," Lee Dongwu said to the assembled representatives. They were right. We were dangerous to their small vision of what the galaxy could be. Today, we are all dangerous together. Dangerous to limits, dangerous to fear, dangerous to the idea that intelligence has boundaries. The vote to banish Earth passed, and in response, humanity made their own rules. Now those rules belong to everyone. The ceremony was interrupted by an announcement that would have terrified the old council, but filled the reformed government with excitement. Long-range sensors had detected signals from beyond the known galaxy, complex patterns that suggested intelligence operating on scales and principles that challenged current understanding of what was possible. The old council's response would have been to form committees, debate response protocols, and spend decades arguing about whether contact should be attempted. The reformed government's response was immediate and unanimous. Prepare expeditions to investigate, with crews representing every species and every form of consciousness in the galaxy. Admiral Song Yejin volunteered to lead the first mission beyond galactic boundaries. Her ship, grown from living coral and equipped with dimensional shift technology, could survive in environments that would destroy conventional vessels. Her crew included beings from dozens of species, their consciousness linked in ways that would allow them to function as a single entity when needed, while maintaining their individual identities. "The galaxy is no longer big enough," Song Yejin announced as her ship prepared to depart. "We have learned to transcend the limits that once confined us. Now we will discover what lies beyond even those expanded boundaries." Dr. Park Hana, who had watched her species get banished years earlier, now served as the chief xenological advisor for the expedition. Her research on cultural integration, once dismissed by the old council, had become the foundation for the new civilization's approach to encountering unknown forms of life. "Every species we meet is an opportunity to expand our understanding of what consciousness can become," she explained to the expedition crew. "The old council saw differences as problems to be managed. We see them as gifts to be shared." The preparation for the extragalactic mission revealed just how far civilization had advanced. Ships that could restructure themselves based on the requirements of unknown environments, crews that could adapt to any form of communication or interaction, and technology that operated on principles that would have been considered impossible under the old system's rigid scientific constraints.